Hi everyone. I wanted to make a quick video because I want you to know some major points about Old English poetry. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly in terms of the things that I want you to know. So the Old English poetry dates from around the 4th century, a little bit later to 1066 AD. The Anglo-Saxon invaders brought a tradition of oral poetry to Britain. Okay, you should know that most of the people the lay people, so everyday people, did not read or write. So almost everyone was illiterate, and the people who were literate were part of the church and clergy, and they were the ones who copied the manuscripts. It was very difficult and time-consuming to reproduce texts. If you look online, I put a link to one of the libraries where you can actually see some of the manuscripts, and you can see how time-consuming it would be to reproduce the manuscripts. Beowulf is the most famous of Old English poems. All of the Old English poems are anonymous authors, so we don't know who actually wrote these texts. Most of the texts are written with a pre-Christian heroic mode, so their culture is based on a lot of values of kinship. You'll see in the poems that I've assigned, there's someone called the Lord, and it's a warrior culture. Okay, the Lord is kind of a king, and a lot of the poems discuss the relationship between the Lord and the warriors. And if you look at The Wanderer, that's a text, first-person narration of the warrior and a sense of exile that he faces. There's something called the Mead Hall. The Mead Hall is a place where the warriors would drink and sort of congregate and sort of be together. The poems have employ something called kenning, and that's Kenning, and that is when there's a compound word that's used it sort of poetically to in place of another word. So for example, the sea is referred to in one of these poems as a whale road. And fighting is called battle play, things like that. So this was a very these authors knew the difference between poetic language and regular speech, and they sort of used a kind of high poetry sort of mode. And so this was important for them to make their poems poetic. There's also something called the Ubisant motif that's employed in especially The Wanderer, and that's when a poet asks, like, where are they now? And I'll read you the passage from The Wanderer where that occurs. It's also important to note that these earlier heroic modes were then combined with Christian values and Christian theology. So a lot of times later, the Old English poems mix pre-Christian heroic sorts of culture with later Christian kinds of writing and thoughts and things like that. So I do want to look at the